What's up, fanatics? Today we're going to be talking about the viability of the Lance and Monster Hunter Rise specifically, and I have a pretty long list of points we're going over here today. And just to rip the band-aid off right away, and the title I have is the Lance the worst weapon in Monster Hunter, or something along those lines. And to answer that right away, it is definitely not. After using the Lance for about 10 hunts, I really actually enjoyed my time with it. I think it's a pretty viable weapon compared to some of the ones that I've used so far. Anyway, we're going to go over the bad points real quick first, and then we're going to go over the good points I have, so that we can end on a high note. So, before you, whip your dick out and start slapping me with it for only saying bad things about the Lance, if you're a Lance maid, don't worry, the good parts are at the end. And if you are not a Lance maid and you're like, it's the most boring weapon in the world, well, it is boring, but it's still good, I feel like. Anyway, so the first thing I have on here is that there's not really a point in doing any sort of aerial attacks with the Lance, jumping off your dog or using wire bug attacks. Much like the Great Sword, it's much too slow. The damage that it does doesn't really make up for it, and there is a slight recovery time after you land, just because the weapon is so heavy. It is definitely more viable than Great Sword aerial attacks though, but I mean, at the same point, along those same lines, it's not really that useful anyway, so I wouldn't really bother with using any aerial strikes with the Lance unless you want to look cool, which is definitely a reason you might want to do it. Anyway, of course, the Lance also has a very slow movement while you're out. If the monster gets far away, you might as well just put your Lance up and go after it. You can use the charge attack to close the distance, but I mean, that usually just ends with you getting hit if you try to do that, so I definitely wouldn't recommend that. So basically, whenever the monster leaves, directly in front of you, you're going to have to put the Lance up. The Lance also has a very slow attack speed, which leads to a very, very low damage output. The Lance probably takes longer to kill a monster than any other weapon in the game, at least with my minimal experience. I'm sure there's some Lance mains out there that can kill monsters very quickly with them, but I feel like even the best Lance mains would be able to kill a monster as fast as like the best dual dagger main. So, this is very low damage output, and expect any fight you get into to last quite a while. Using the Lance, it probably took me longer to kill monsters than any other weapon. That's not always a bad thing though. Another problem with the Lance, there's not really a whole lot of combos you can do. The moveset's very minimal. Usually you can just do 3 attack combo and that's about it. It's really simple. Nothing really switches up. It's pretty basic, to be honest. So I mean, not a very flashy weapon, obviously. Then the running charge attack does very low damage and basically just annihilates your sharpness. There's very little situations where I would ever recommend using the running charge attack. Even though it is a cool looking gimmick, it doesn't really have much practical use, I feel like, except at a point we'll get into later. Another thing is, there's not really much point in attacking with your shield up, because you can do that, but since you can get the shield up so quickly without, attacking with it up, so you can get it out, you can just put it up so quickly anyway, there's really no point in you doing the attack with your shield already up, than doing those little pokes. It just does slow damage to make the fight last even longer. Now, there's not really very many situations where I would recommend that. And that's really all the negatives I have. Most of them are really just about the Lance being very slow, not very flashy, and doing kind of low damage. You're gonna be like, oh, if it's slow and does no damage, why would you even fucking use it? And now we're going to go into the positives here. The shield pulls up incredibly quickly, and I was using kind of a lower level Lance than I should have for a lot of these quests, and it guarded against all of the monsters I fought strongest attacks, so with very little damage taken or no damage taken. So you can very quickly pull up your shield and take those hits, which is very nice. Attacking, when you attack with the Lance, I believe in older games when you would attack, your stamina would get drained, but in Monster Hunter Rise, your stamina is not drained from attacking. That means the only way to lose stamina with while using your Lance is when you're defending, and it's very easy just to let go of the shield button for like a second to recharge your stamina. So essentially, there's no reason you should ever get hit with a full-on attack if you know the monster's combos and you know how to use the Lance well. So realistically, you probably you'd never have to deal with the Lance heal, because you just defend against everything. The one good thing about the running charge attack is that it builds up status effects. When I had a poison Lance that deals poison damage, and I believe it helped me poison the monster a lot quicker. when I did use the charge attacks, just because it hit so like many goddamn times with the poison in effect. The charge attack you can do with the lance, the sweeping charge attack, has a very large hit radius, which is nice. Deals a considerable amount of damage and charges incredibly quickly. Honestly, it's just a really cool, neat attack that there's not really too many negatives with. With the same with the greatsword attack, while you're charging it, you are kind of vulnerable, but since it's so much quicker to get the full damage with it, it's really not a problem. And I definitely like that attack quite a bit, and it helps make the lance a little more viable when you need to deal a lot of damage quickly. When the monster's stunned or asleep, it's a good charge attack to do a pretty nice chunk of damage. Basically impossible to die while using the lance if you're familiar with the monster. Just put that shield up all the time. The fights are probably going to take a very, very long time to win any fights with the lance, but I mean, you should get through any monster no trouble. You're basically a walking fortress, you know. You're a tank, basically. If we were talking to MMO standards, you deal very low damage, but you're not going to fucking die because you're an actual beast with the lance. And then the last positive I have on here is that you can do high or lower attacks depending on the situation to help hit crit spots. This is particularly helpful, as you can see in the Gossarag video. When I would aim up with the lance and do those upwards attacks, I would get a lot of crit hits on its head. And then obviously you can do the standard straightforward attacks on monsters that are closer to the ground. I think that's a pretty cool thing they've added to the lance that honestly make it pretty nice. Really helps with breaking parts and shit like that. So, you know, that's another positive about the lance. Overall, the lance is pretty unexciting to use, as you can tell by my tone throughout this whole video. But I think it's a very good, very viable weapon that maybe if you're not familiar with the game as much, if you're a noob and you really need some extra help, I think maybe use the lance and you shouldn't be dying. And it should give you a lot of time to really learn the combos of monsters and prepare. A negative about the lance I didn't mention earlier is that you can't really dodge with it out, but once again, why the hell do you need to dodge if you can just defend against everything? So I mean, that's not even a real negative. But yeah, I had a decent time with the lance. I enjoyed it, I suppose. It definitely wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Monster fights took a little bit longer than I would like, but I basically never got hit the whole time, so it's like, who gives a shit? The monsters I fought with my lance were the Zinogre, Royal Ludroth, Kula Yaku, and then the Gossarag were the ones I fought while using the lance specifically for this video. And I obviously have used the lance before in Monster Hunter Rise as well. And those were the fights I was really looking at. And honestly, all four of them were pretty easy with the lance. Easier than normal, I would say. It just took also a lot longer than normal. The lance I used was the Nog Serpent Blade 2. It dealt poison damage, and it honestly poisoned monsters pretty quick. And I feel like it was a pretty decent lance. Probably a little bit below the level of the Gossarag and the Zinogre, but cleaned up house on the Royal Ludroth and Kula Yaku pretty easily, obviously. But yeah, lance isn't that bad. I think it's overhated from what I've seen online. People will give it the bad end of the stick or whatever the fuck the saying is. And honestly, I would probably place a lance as more viable than the greatsword, but I definitely would say the greatsword is a lot more fun to use. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I'm sorry it's been so long since I've released a video, and I hope you have a good one. Stay blessed. Oh man.